Today, we're looking into a crucial aspect of chess strategy that every beginner should grasp: the 7 most common mistakes in chess openings. Correcting these errors can significantly improve your game, so let's explore them together. Mistake number 1. Neglecting development. One of the most common mistakes for new players is neglecting the development of their pieces early in the game. Imagine starting with the move pawn to e4, your opponent responds with pawn to e5, and then you push your pawns with pawn to d3 and pawn to f3. While this might seem okay, it's crucial to get your knights and bishops into the game to control the center and protect your king. When you move pawns multiple times without bringing out your pieces, you are wasting valuable time. For example, instead of moving pawn to d3 and pawn to f3, you could develop your knight to f3 and your bishop to c4. This way, your pieces are actively placed, controlling key squares and preparing for future moves. Knights and bishops are your best friends in the opening. They need to be developed to active squares where they can influence the center. Developing your pieces early allows you to control more of the board and prepares you for a strong middle game. Mistake number 2. Ignoring king safety. Another frequent blunder is ignoring king safety by delaying or neglecting the castling maneuver. Let's break this down. You play pawn to e4, your opponent responds with pawn to e5, and you continue with knight to f3, bishop to c4, pawn to d3, and then finally castle. By delaying castling, your king remains vulnerable in the center, making it an easy target for your opponent's attacks. Castling early, like in the sequence pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, bishop to c4, and then castling, ensures your king's safety behind a wall of pawns. This also connects your rooks, allowing them to support each other and control key files. Delaying castling can leave your king exposed to various threats, including a quick attack from your opponent. Always remember, the safety of your king is paramount. Castling not only protects your king, but also brings your rook into play, which is vital for a strong middle game. Mistake number 3. Creating weaknesses. The third mistake involves inadvertently creating weaknesses in your pawn structure. For example, you start with pawn to e4, your opponent plays pawn to e5, then you play knight to f3, and your opponent responds with pawn to f6. This move weakens the pawn structure around your opponent's king, making it easier for you to launch an attack. Creating weaknesses can also occur on your side. Suppose you play pawn to g4 to chase away an opponent's bishop or knight early in the game. This move might seem aggressive, but it creates a weak spot around your king, particularly if you haven't castled yet. Weak pawns, often isolated or doubled pawns, can become targets for your opponent and difficult to defend. Always think twice before making pawn moves that can create holes in your position. A solid pawn structure is key to a strong defense and a coordinated attack. Mistake number 4. Playing too passively. Passive play, characterized by a failure to challenge your opponent's control of the center, is a common mistake. Imagine you start with pawn to e4, and your opponent plays pawn to e5. You continue with knight to c3 and bishop to b5. While these moves develop pieces, they lack the vigor and assertiveness required to contest the central squares. Instead, proactive measures such as pawn to d4 or knight to f3 assert dominance in the center, laying the groundwork for future offensive or defensive maneuvers. For instance, playing pawn to d4 challenges your opponent's control and opens lines for your pieces to become more active. Controlling the center is fundamental in chess. It allows your pieces to move freely across the board and restricts your opponent's mobility. By playing passively, you give your opponent the initiative and the ability to dictate the flow of the game. Mistake number 5. Ignoring opponent's threats. An error frequently observed among beginners is the oversight of opponent's threats. Picture a scenario where you start with pawn to e4, your opponent plays pawn to e5, you continue with knight to f3, pawn to d4, and knight takes d4. However, failing to acknowledge your opponent's plan, you hastily play knight takes c6, overlooking the impending threat to your d4 pawn. This oversight can lead to losing material early and weakening your position. It's crucial to always consider your opponent's moves and threats. For instance, if your opponent plays pawn to d5, you need to recognize that this move attacks your pawn on e4. Ignoring such threats can lead to quick losses and a deteriorating position. Always ask yourself, what is my opponent trying to do, before making your move. Being aware of threats and responding appropriately is a key aspect of defensive and strategic play. Mistake number 6. Misplacing your pieces. Another common mistake is misplacing your pieces, especially the queen. For example, starting with pawn to e4, your opponent responds with pawn to e5, and you hastily deploy your queen to h5. This early queen sortie not only exposes it to potential harassment from your opponent's pieces, but also disrupts the natural development of your knights and bishops. Your queen is a powerful piece, but bringing it out too early can make it a target and force you to waste moves protecting it. Instead, focus on developing your knights and bishops to active squares. For instance, knight to f3 and bishop to c4 are solid developing moves that control key squares and prepare for castling. Misplacing pieces can lead to losing them or putting them in positions where they are ineffective. Proper piece placement ensures that all your pieces work together in harmony, contributing to both defense and offense. Mistake number 7, overextending your position. Finally, overextending your position by pushing pawns too aggressively without proper support can backfire. Imagine you play pawn to e4, your opponent responds with pawn to e5, and you continue with pawn to f4, pawn to d4. This ambitious pawn expansion, while seemingly imposing, leaves your pawn structure vulnerable and weakens your position. Overextending can lead to your pawns becoming easy targets and your pieces being unable to support each other effectively. For instance, if you push too many pawns forward without developing your pieces, your opponent can easily counterattack your exposed pawns. A balanced approach is key. Develop your pieces first, secure your king, and only then look for opportunities to expand your position with pawn moves. Overextension can also lead to your pieces being cut off from each other, making coordination difficult. By avoiding these mistakes, you can build a stronger foundation for your chess games. Remember, the opening is all about setting up a solid position for the middle game. Develop your pieces, protect your king, and control the center. If you think this video is helpful, then click on this video also where I explained about top 5 chess openings. Goodbye.